Inter Milan have won the Scudetto and they've done so with some genius tactics, and these are the 3 steps Inzaghi has used to destroy everyone in the league. Inter were the team that ended Juventus' dominance and they did so with a 3-5-2. Inzaghi has kept the 3-5-2 but he's added his own genius. The first of Inter's 3 steps is fluidity, which is the constant changing of positions, and Inter do this a lot, especially in build-up. They would often pass the ball around the backline with a lot of their defenders switching with their midfielders, and they sometimes end up with all 3 of the centre-back positions being taken up by midfielders. But why? The main reason is simply just to confuse the opposition. They'll try it in wide areas, and if it doesn't work, they'll try again. Let's say number 8 is man-marking Mkhitaryan. Mkhitaryan could move out the way, leaving a gap in the midfield for Bastoni to fill. Also, if the opposition's sitting back and being stubborn, they might drop a midfielder with a better passing range to create something. And while many see the 3-5-2 as a boring defensive formation, Inzaghi's revolutionised what we think about it. But we'll get onto that later, because that's our 3rd pillar. The second one is breaking through pressure. Over a year ago there was a tactical revolution in the Premier League. Roberto De Zerbi realised that in build-up you can move your players deep against a high-pressing team. If the opposition man-marked them, which many oppositions do, there would be space in behind to exploit, with fast wingers like Solly March and Matoma. This tactic was absolutely genius and it took De Zerbi to 6th place, with Pep Guardiola borrowing this tactic and winning the treble. This season it's also been used by Ange, Arteta and Emery, and the 3 of them have done very well. Every team that masters this tactic seems to have a massive advantage, and one team that has mastered this tactic is Inter Milan. Like De Zerbi, he has 6 players deep and narrow while having a midfield 2 and a front 4. They can use third-man passes to break through pressure, and with the defenders pinned they can make great chances. They can use their goalkeeper Jan Sommer as part of the backline, so they've got 11 players deep, while the opposition can only commit 10 to the press. And it also helps that their midfielders are good on the ball, such as Çalhanoğlu, a former number 10 that's transformed to become a number 6. Now he may have learnt the qualities of a defensive midfielder, but he hasn't lost his ability as an attacking midfielder, and he still has amazing creativity. He's just a deep-lying playmaker instead of an advanced one. Despite his deep position, he has the 4th highest expected assists in the league, and only one midfielder in the league has completed more long passes. Because of his threat, many defences would try to get narrow to cover off the centre. But if that happens, Inter can just widen their shape and play around the outside of them. But there's one problem. If this is so effective, then why aren't Brighton good this season? Well, Inter Milan have one thing that Brighton don't, and it's the most important part of this video, the 3rd pillar. Because if you have really good build-up, then teams just aren't going to bother pressing against you. They're just going to sit back. And that's why you need to be able to kill teams. That's why Manchester City are so good. Now, do you remember when I said Inzaghi has revolutionised what we think about the 3-5-2 formation? Because the very best teams in the world, the most attacking teams, the possession-oriented teams, all use either a 2-3-5 or a 3-2-5. That's 2 in the wide space, 2 in the half space and 1 up front. And while Inter have 2 strikers, either of them are equally able to play in the half space. And then you have Inter's wingbacks, and wingbacks is an interesting word because they're more or less wingers. Di Marco has more shots per 90 than Pulisic, but their midfielders are an attacking threat as well. Nicolo Barella ranks in the top 1% among all midfielders for passes into the penalty area, while Fratesi scores more goals per 90 than any other midfielder in Europe. And then you have their wide centre-backs, which are basically full-backs. Benjamin Pavard is in the top 2% among centre-backs for crosses, because he's not like other centre-backs. What all of this suggests is that Inter Milan aren't your average 3-5-2. They're a lot more flexible, and a lot more like a Pep Guardiola team. And that's what the 3rd pillar is all about, because Pep Guardiola and other great teams have one thing that a lot of smaller teams do not have. Time and again, a team would come out from nowhere with a tactical revolution, and then they would go back into their place the following season because teams have figured them out. But to stop this from happening, the very best teams could do one of 3 things. Number 1 is the most obvious: have more quality. Number 2 is simply have some tactics that can't be figured out. Like Manchester City, there are ways of stopping it, but they always manage to come out on top. And number 3, if one of your routes to goal gets figured out, you've got another one, and another one, and another one. This is what Inter Milan has, and I call it unlimited options. This graph shows different teams' style of play. A team like Manchester City have very slow attacks. They slowly pass the ball around and complete many passes. This means they're slow and intricate, except there's something strange with Inter Milan. Inter have the second most direct attacks in the league, which means they like to break quick, right? Well, they've also got the most average passes per sequence in the league, which shows they like to slowly pass it around. So which is it? It can't be both. Except it can. They do both. They do everything. Inter Milan are almost unpressable, and that forces their opposition into two options. They can either sit back and not bother pressing them, like many oppositions do, or they can get really aggressive and press them very aggressively. If they choose the latter, Inter might not be able to get through, but they can go over. They have two strikers, and against two centre-backs, this can be very difficult to defend a long ball. So if you get too aggressive, they can punish you immediately. But what if you just sit back? Well, they have quality, and they have what all the best teams in Europe have, a 3-2-5 or a 2-3-5 shape, the ultimate possession shape for breaking down the low block. And while it's a 3-5-2 on paper, Barella can move into the half space, a striker can move into half space, a centre-back can overlap as a fullback. The 3-2-5 or the 2-3-5 can be made in so many different ways. So they can switch to a front five, but remember, fluidity. Fluidity is very important, and it's absolutely key for breaking teams down. But there's one other thing they have, and it's Calhanoglu. I know I've mentioned it before, but he's just amazing at progressing the ball. Another thing they could do is slowly move to one side of the pitch before giving it to Calhanoglu to switch it to the other side, creating a hidden chance. And this is one thing that Xabi Alonso is amazing at. The best team in Italy, against arguably the best team in the world this season, have a lot of similarities. Their De Zerbi-like build-up, their different options, and also this. But there's one glaring similarity, and it's their back three formation. And back threes, after rising, have kind of fallen for a bit, with the 4-3-3 and 4-2-3-1 taking over. But it looks like they're back, and with the best teams in Europe using one, it looks like they're sparking a tactical revolution. And while Inzaghi is making the 3-5-2 not so much of a boring defensive shape, it can be used defensively quite well. And while his wingbacks are basically wingers, it's kind of like a 3-3-4. And what's the opposite of a 4-3-3? A 3-3-4. So when teams build up in a 4-3-3, they're going to be facing Inter's 3-3-4, a man-marking system where they kind of have to go long. Or using this man-to-man press, they could pounce, catching the opposition off guard and winning the ball back in a dangerous area. But they're still a 3-5-2. The opposition players are used to playing defensively under managers like Conte they've had in their career. And even though Inzaghi is changing what we think about 3-5-2s, they're still known for having 5 defenders. And one of my favourite parts about Xabi Alonso's Leverkusen is the fact that he starts with a back 5, and if the ball shifts out wide, one of his wingbacks can act as a winger with 4 defenders still at the back. This is one advantage of the back 5 formation, another one being there are 5 defenders, and most teams attack with 5 attackers, so Inter can easily go man-to-man. And if the opposition commits a 6th player, then they're quite exposed at the back, and Inter can counter-attack like they did under Conte. Most attacking managers only attack with a front 5, apart from Postecoglou. So if your backline are good at man marking, then that's a massive advantage. But Inter have another trick up their sleeve, and it's set pieces. They've scored 14 from them this season, and that's 1 away from number 1. The increasing importance of set piece goals has been one of the tactical stories of the season, and Inter have mastered it. I also want to give credit to players like Martinez, who's been an absolute goal machine, and Bastoni has been excellent as well. And while this is the starting 11 I've mainly used throughout the video, players like Fratesi, Darmian and Arnautovic have made a good contribution as well. But no one has been more impressive than their manager Simone Inzaghi.